Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers.
Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We are glad you're joining us this week. Last week, Christy said she had an exciting case for us, and I am ready to hear this one.
I'm ready to tell it. Today, we're taking another trip down under.
We're going to Australia?
We are. Our listeners are growing in Australia.
That is awesome.
So I wanted to find a case from there to show our love, as weird as that sounds. There's not a lot of ways for us to show our love to you, other than bringing you cases.
We do appreciate our listeners.
We do, no matter where you're listening from. After a lot of searching through Australian dirtbags, I have found a case for us today that I am not sure has ever been told. I could not find one YouTube video, documentary, or even another podcast about this dirtbag. Perhaps this case is more widely known in Australia, and I just could not access the same information here in Canada. So if you are from Australia and know this case, please let us know, because this has never happened to me before.
We're usually pretty good at doing deep digs.
What I did find in my research was a very detailed court document, plus some Australian news articles. And so I will be sticking mostly to the court document for this case. I will warn you that it is extremely descriptive, but I must say that Australia knows how to write up a court document. The one I found was from the Supreme Court of Victoria, and it was the best laid out one that I have come across to date. So comprehensive and organized.
Way to go, Australia.
Kudos to you.
If only they could all be like that.
Oh, I wish. Today, we are covering a dirtbag who had no reason to kill. Evil overtook him, and he killed the one thing in his life that he felt like he didn't deserve: love.
So he killed the one person that loved him?
Yeah, he does.
Oh.
And the one person that he really loved. Probably his healthiest relationship.
That is interesting.
It seems backwards, doesn't it?
It does.
This man had also talked about killing someone so that he could be with his two brothers who were also locked up at the time.
What?
It ran in the family. So I think this case fuels discussion regarding nature versus nurture. Can three brothers all be dirtbags, or is there more to it than that? I tend to lean towards nurture when criminal activity can be so rampant in one family of siblings, but then again, I guess the same argument can be made to support it being nature.
It's both, Christy. It's always both.
True.
But do you think that he was just looking up to his brothers and he wanted to exemplify them?
Oh, I definitely think that could be part of it. They were really the only role models that he had, and they were not good ones.
So it doesn't sound like they had the greatest childhood.
No, they don't. Lloyd Morris Crosbie was born on April 16th, 1982, in Wangaratta, Victoria, Australia. I couldn't find his parents' names, but he was the fifth born of 5 children in his family. Wangaratta is a small city in northeast Victoria. It is 236 kilometers, or 147 miles from Melbourne. The city sits at the junction of the Ovens and King Rivers, which drain the northwestern slopes of the Victorian Alps. And a little fun fact, 2 years before Lloyd was born, in a town only 10 kilometers away called Glenrowan, there was a shootout that led to the capture of Australia's most famous bushranger, Ned Kelly. Although they lived in a beautiful area, the Crosbie home was not a stable nor loving one. It was reported that domestic violence was a common experience for all of them in the home. Lloyd grew up in chaos. His father was an alcohol abuser, and his mother reportedly suffered from significant psychiatric issues. What those issues were, I could not find.
Doesn't sound like a great environment.
It was not. When Lloyd was 5 years old, his parents split up, but that unfortunately did not improve his living situation. He, along with his siblings, were in and out of foster care. He was sent from foster home to foster home, with small stints of being placed with one of his parents in between. He was also shipped out to extended family at times, so a super unstable upbringing. I bet it seemed like he was living out of a suitcase most of his childhood.
That's not a lot of opportunity to form any really secure attachments.
No, not at all. This transient lifestyle meant that Lloyd was frequently changing schools and had a hard time making friends. He was the target of bullying most places he went. He finally dropped out of school at the age of 15 and never really got a job. I am unsure of how many different homes he went to or if he was ever with any of his siblings during those times. But I do know that he did spend time with his older brothers, whom he looked up to and almost idolized during his childhood. Sadly, his older brothers, like I said, were not a good influence on growing and impressionable Lloyd. They would spend their time together torturing and then killing dogs, cats, and any other small animals that they could get their hands on.
What?
Yeah.
Those are quite the pastimes.
Not what I did with my siblings growing up, that's for sure. They would also watch violent horror movies with young Lloyd. So he was being exposed to some violence very early on in his life.
And so he just thinks that that's the norm?
Unfortunately. Professor Mullen stated about this band of brothers that Lloyd spent his, quote, formative years as part of a closed, distressed group who sought in violent videos, violent fantasies, and violent acts some sense of protection and control over a world they jointly expressed as rejecting and abusive. And I feel like that summed it up pretty well. This means that between his parents, his home life, and his brothers, Lloyd was no stranger to violence, so much so that even murder wasn't off the table for his family. At first, Lloyd's brothers started out with lesser crimes, but as they approached adulthood, their crimes became much more violent. When Lloyd was still a teenager, his oldest brother was sent to an inpatient program at the state-secured psychiatric hospital after he murdered someone but was found not guilty due to mental impairment.
There are some mental illnesses that run in families and can be genetic, and if his mom was suffering...
True. So he did actually murder someone but was found...
not guilty by reason of insanity.
Mental impairment was the phrase that they used.
Okay, and the next brother, because you said there were two.
There was two. His second oldest brother was in prison serving a sentence for attempted murder.
Oh, so he didn't go through with it.
No mental impairment there. He had tried to kill someone, but was thankfully not successful. But was still doing the time, as he should. On numerous occasions, Lloyd expressed wanting to kill someone so he could be, quote-unquote, reunited with his brothers.
Because he missed them or because he wanted to be like them?
I think he wanted to be with them.
Okay.
And maybe felt a little left out. He's the younger brother, always wanting to be like his two older brothers who he looked up to. So they're both locked up. And he's probably feeling, oh man, I have to follow in their footsteps. I have to be cool like my brothers.
Right. But probably not so much wanting to be with them because they're not even in the same facility.
They're not. But he probably was thinking, hey, either way it goes, I'll end up with one of them.
Oh, that's true. So was his murder premeditated then?
The idea of it was, but when he actually goes on to murder, it was pretty spontaneous.
Okay, so the timing of it was spontaneous.
Yes, the idea of it had been premeditated for a while.
So sad.
I know.
That means a loved one was living with him and being nice to him, and he was pretending while he was planning their death.
I don't even think he was pretending. I think he genuinely loved this person.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Then how could he murder them?
Well, that's a good question, Melissa. But we are going to get into all those details. On August 15th of 2000, just months after turning 18, police were called to the family residence because Lloyd was out of control, quote-unquote, smashing up the home and all of his stuff. The neighbors had heard the commotion and called in the disturbance. Lloyd was arrested and taken to the Latrobe Regional Hospital to be treated by a psychiatrist. Apparently, the police were quite concerned after listening to him talk at the time of his arrest. Lloyd said that he wanted to, quote, slit everybody's throats and rip their faces off.
It doesn't seem that much out of the norm if you figure he's been watching all these violent movies and has been abusing animals with his brothers since he was little.
It's true. But for the officers, they were pretty shook by this. It's not something most people will say while you're being arrested. The senior constable who escorted Lloyd to the hospital said about him, quote, listening to Crosbie, he was a very angry and disturbed person. He feels like the world is against him. He has a deep hatred for all those who have caused him grief in the past. I believe that he could cause serious injury to someone in the future. He appeared fixated with the idea of killing someone in an effort to be reunited with his two brothers. All members, meaning of the police force, should be made aware of his thoughts and treat Crosbie with extreme caution.
So that was on his file from then on.
Yes, and this was from a senior constable, someone who had been around for a while.
Okay.
He was basically telling all the officers, watch out for this guy. We know he's a dirtbag. When Lloyd spoke to the psychiatrist, he expressed how much he missed his older brothers who were in prison, and that he wanted to kill people by slashing their throats or stabbing them in the temple to be with them. He told the doctor that his favorite weapon was a knife because it could be easily concealed.
Those are all very disturbing thoughts.
Yes, he's really putting a lot of thought into it. Lloyd also told the doctor that both of his brothers committed the crimes that sent them to prison when they were 20 years old. So he still had a couple of years to plan exactly what he was going to do.
Yeah, he does not sound stable at all.
No. But surprisingly, the doctor could not find any psychotic features in Lloyd, but considered him, quote, an angry man who had difficulties complying with the rules of society at large.
He almost sounds obsessive.
Yes, I do think he gets fixated on this idea of I have to be like my brothers. It's the Crosbie way.
Choose other family traditions.
No kidding. Go help someone in need. Don't fantasize about what weapons you're going to use and how you're going to kill people. And the fact that he says, oh, I have a couple years till I have to do it, was kind of putting a timeline on there for him, feeling like I have to achieve this by the time I turn 20 to be like my brothers.
Yeah, that's what I mean by obsessive. Like, it's all consuming almost for him.
It is. And he's putting pressure on himself about it. Although the police knew that he had the potential to become dangerous to others, I couldn't find any documentation that he received any long-term help for his mental state.
But he said he wasn't diagnosed with anything.
Right.
But I guess he could have went to anger management.
Oh, definitely. Even just some counseling probably would have helped him.
Anything, really?
Anything. Justice Murray Kellum, the judge who ruled over Lloyd's case, ordered a psychiatric report on Lloyd. Professor Mullen, a professor of forensic psychiatry at Monash University, later examined Lloyd and stated about this time in Lloyd's life that he suffered a disorganized home life and often an environment of frank neglect. Sometime during the same year as his arrest, while 18, Lloyd met a girl named Melissa Moz. The two started dating and soon moved in together. Melissa moved into the home owned by Lloyd's father in Morwell. Morwell is close to a 4.5-hour drive from Wangaratta, where Lloyd was born. Morwell is a town in the Latrobe Valley area of Gippsland in southeastern Victoria. They lived there only for a short time before moving on November 5th to a Ministry of Housing home at 2 Boona Street, Morwell.
So just the two of them moved off together?
They did, to begin with. On April 8th of the following year, 2001, the couple moved in with Melissa's mother, Kay Moz, at 22 Dable Street in Morwell. They occupied the second bedroom on the second floor in her home. You might be surprised to learn that Lloyd and Melissa had a good relationship. The couple were described as being close. Lloyd became close with Melissa's mother as well. Their relationships were said to be affectionate. Kay welcomed Lloyd into their family with open arms, and Lloyd reciprocated those warm feelings. This could have been the first time he was in a real loving family situation. No one suspected the horrific act that would take place in their home just months after Melissa and Lloyd moved in with her mother, Kay.
So he's going to kill Melissa?
Yes, he is.
Ugh.
I know, it's terrible.
How would you feel as a mother if you brought somebody into your home, you were nice to them, developed a relationship with them, and then they kill your daughter?
I know. I cannot even imagine what a horrific realization that both of these women go through. Because there was no lead up to the murder. No warning signs. It was like evil just took over in the spur of the moment, and Lloyd would finally do what he had always said he would do in an attempt to be with his dirtbag brothers. Again, I am basing this account from the court documents, and like I said, I don't think it has been told often, if at all, so I am going to go into detail. Be warned, it is graphic. It was 3 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, August 18th, 2001. Melissa and Lloyd had already gone to bed. Melissa was fast asleep, laying face down to the right of Lloyd on their double bed. Melissa's mother, Kay, was down the hall sleeping in her room. Lloyd was sitting in bed watching a movie. To me, this was a scene that seems typical for a Friday night for a lot of couples. Lloyd was wearing corduroy pants with a scabbard attached to the front of them, which I believe is like a knife sheath, possibly the type that goes through your belt.
He had a knife on in bed?
I think he always had it on his pants, and he was still wearing them.
Oh, okay. So he just hadn't gotten undressed.
Yeah.
Weird.
I think it's weird. For one thing, wouldn't you take your belt off to lay down and get comfy to watch a movie?
Well, most people would take their pants off.
That's true.
So
That's the first thing that goes off as soon as I walk in the house. Inside the scabbard was a knife with an 80mm curved blade, which is just over 3 inches. This wasn't a huge knife, but one that you would typically use for skinning. As Lloyd sat in the bed watching his movie, he looked down to his side and saw his loving girlfriend asleep next to him.
The one who had taken him in.
Yes, they were living at her mother's house.
And loved him despite all of the horrible stuff that had happened to him.
Yes. And he loved her. They were loving towards one another. There was no abuse, no red flags leading up to this. He was just this guy that she loved who had a rough upbringing and had dirtbag brothers.
And she was giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Yes. At this point, he really hadn't given her any reason to think otherwise. His earlier arrest was well before they met. Lloyd then decided to take his knife out of the scabbard. He looked down at Melissa again, and with the knife in his right hand, he used a downward motion to stab Melissa in the head 3 times.
What? That's so out of the blue.
Yeah. Just sitting there, looks at her, decides now's just as good of a time as any, and he just pulls out his knife and stabs her in the head.
They hadn't been fighting. They hadn't had an argument, a disagreement over which movie to watch.
No, she was asleep. It was 3 a.m.
Was he watching a violent movie?
That I'm not sure. I think he was always watching a violent movie. That's what he was brought up on. That was like cartoons for him.
So out of the blue.
It is. But most of us can sit there beside our spouse and watch a scary or violent movie and not end up murdering them.
So it speaks to how obsessive he was thinking about this.
Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, it overtook him in that moment. With this initial attack, Melissa woke up and rightfully began to scream. I cannot imagine what would have been going through her mind at the time. As I said, her and Lloyd weren't even fighting before she fell asleep next to him. I am certain it would have taken a moment for her brain to compute what had just happened.
Wonder if she could even process that.
I don't think so. It would be dark, it's the middle of the night, you're disoriented.
You're not thinking that the person that loves you is stabbing you?
No. But Lloyd did not give Melissa time to process before confirming what could only be her worst nightmare. This dirtbag grabbed her by the hair at the back of her head with his left hand, so he could have complete control of her head. He then began to stab her multiple times in the throat with his right hand. Melissa tried to fight off her attacker, to push him away from her, and in doing so, she sustained cuts to her hands. At this point, Lloyd had also cut his own hand on the blade of the knife. It is not uncommon for a stabber's hand to slide down the handle of a bloody knife and accidentally slide across the blade, injuring themselves. Miraculously, after being stabbed several times, Melissa somehow managed to escape her boyfriend's evil grasp. With severe injuries, Melissa shifted away from Lloyd and sat in an upright position on the bed, with her back against the wall. She bent her knees and brought them close to her body. Likely in shock, she raised her hands in front of her face. Satisfied for a moment with what he had done to Melissa, Lloyd got up off of the bed and left the room, with the intention to go to Melissa's mother's room down the hall.
What?
Yes, unfortunately.
Why did he decide to kill them both? One wasn't enough.
No. And this is just going to get worse from here, so I think once he flipped that switch, he could not shut it off. As Lloyd reached the hallway, he saw Kay rushing towards their room. She was awakened by her daughter's screams and was coming to check on them. Lloyd later told police that he had every intention to stab Kay as well, and that is what he did. At first, Lloyd could just see Kay's silhouette in the dark hallway. He flipped on the light so he could see her better. Things happened fast, but I feel like Kay might have had enough time to see Lloyd covered in her daughter's blood coming for her. That being said, things happened so quickly, and with everything suddenly going from dark to light, she might have been disoriented and didn't see much prior to her attack. Lloyd immediately attacked the woman who had welcomed him with loving arms into her home. He ruthlessly plunged his knife into the right side of Kay's throat. He then viciously stabbed her in the head, neck, and upper back. He stabbed her until she fell to the floor.
When you say he stabbed her in the head, is he stabbing them in the temple like how he told that psychologist?
There are some stab wounds to their temple.
That's where he was aiming.
I think he was just frantically stabbing wherever it would land.
Because the head isn't a normal place where you're going to stab somebody.
No.
But that's what he was fantasizing about.
It's true. And I'm assuming both women were shorter than him. And so he was probably raising his arm and just coming down and stabbing them where he could.
Like downwards, right?
That's how I envisioned it.
Right.
Because it was hitting her head, her neck, and her upper back.
Got it. I'm envisioning her then hunched over.
Yes, probably trying to protect herself. Like her daughter, Kay tried to fight back and push off her attacker, also sustaining defensive wounds to her hands. Lloyd told the police that as Kay raised her hands against him to push him off, he was, quote, stabbing, slashing, cutting her. After Kay fell to the ground, she hollered out to her daughter, quote, Melissa, call an ambulance. I think I am dying.
Oh, that is awful. She doesn't know or realize that her daughter's already dead.
Her daughter's not dead.
What?
She's not.
How did she live through all that?
She's still alive. And so Melissa would now know that her mother is being attacked as well and thinks that she is dying.
That is awful.
It is. It would have instilled so much terror in her.
Because not only are they worried about their loved one, but that loved one was their help. And now they know no help is coming.
That's true. I didn't even think of it that way, but that would be a panic, knowing that you are both now incapacitated against this vicious monster.
That would be awful.
Yes, this is an awful case.
I don't know what would be worse. Knowing that you couldn't go help them because you were incapacitated or too injured, or knowing that they couldn't come help you.
It's both.
Yeah.
It is always both, especially when you're talking about a mother and daughter scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Lloyd left Kay bleeding out on the floor and returned to the bedroom that he shared with Melissa. When he entered, he saw that Melissa was now on the floor beside the bed, I assume attempting to escape or to help her mother. Lloyd showed no mercy. He walked up to Melissa and again began stabbing her. He repeatedly stabbed her in the throat and upper body. Next, he circled back to Kay and also inflicted more stab wounds to her throat, upper body, and back. Not finished, he went back to Melissa for a third time and stabbed her repeatedly again in the same areas, her neck, chest, and back. Somehow, Melissa was able to yell out to Lloyd and ask him, quote, "What are you doing?" Lloyd told police that he replied to her, quote, "I am sorry, but I have to."
Yes, he's obsessed and compelled.
He is.
Ugh. So he must confess to the police fully then. I don't know how else they would be able to tell that he went back and forth to them in such a short amount of time.
Yes, all of this detail we get from Lloyd. Eventually, he gives a very full confession. After saying this to Melissa, he again grabbed her by her hair and started to stab the other side of her neck. While stabbing her, approximately 10 millimeters from the tip of the knife broke off and lodged into Melissa's skull. When this happened, Lloyd took a temporary break. He walked into the lounge room and vomited on the floor.
So he was disturbed by it.
He did love her, but he just wasn't disturbed enough to stop. Not deterred, he approached Kay, stabbed her and slit her throat. He paused and checked on Melissa. He held his hand on her stomach to see if he could detect any movement of breath. While doing this, he could hear Kay moaning in pain. The drive to survive that these two women had was truly beyond remarkable, and the cold-heartedness of this dirtbag is disgusting. He had so many opportunities to realize what he was doing and stop, but it only gets worse from here.
What? He already slit their throats.
I know.
How are they still alive?
Well, only Kay was alive at this point. Content that Melissa was dead, Lloyd entered the hallway to where Kay was struggling for her life. On the hallway table were 2 porcelain Chinese-style ornaments. Lloyd picked up the first ornament and struck Kay on the head with it, shattering it. He then did the same with the second ornament, hitting her multiple times until this one broke into pieces as well. Kay was still making noise, so Lloyd went into the kitchen and grabbed a frying pan from the stovetop and used that to inflict more injury to Kay's head. He hit her so hard that he buckled the frying pan.
I don't even know where you would begin as a forensic pathologist to separate all of these wounds that have happened to these women.
Oh, it would be a nightmare. Still not satisfied, Lloyd began searching the house to find something else to assault this poor woman with. He went into the laundry room and brought back with him the clothes iron. He jabbed the point of the iron into her face until he was sure she was dead.
He's just lost it at this point.
Oh, he makes me sick. And ironically, not wanting to get caught for the crimes that he just committed, even though he said he wanted to be with his brothers in prison, Lloyd tried to stage the crime scene to look like a robbery gone bad. He He tore up the house and then took Kay's cell phone along with $90 from her purse to make it appear as if she was robbed. And I'm sorry, if someone's robbing you, they are not going to kill you in this vicious way.
No, not so much overkill.
No, they're not going to take their time. They're going to want to kill you and get out of there as fast as they can, in my opinion. Instead of just fleeing the scene, this demented dirtbag decided that he wanted to have sex with his girlfriend one last time.
No way.
I wish I was joking. I won't go into all the disturbing details about this part, but what I will say is that he placed her body on the bed and raped her more than once, in more than one way, for about a half hour. To help himself get off, he placed a pornographic magazine on her back to look at while he defiled her.
No way.
Yeah.
What a dirtbag.
He's sickening. When finished, he took the time to take a shower and bandaged the cuts on his hand. He then packed himself a little bag to go. Inside the bag, he placed clothes, toiletries, some cooking utensils, more bandages, and of course, some of his precious pornographic magazines.
Did he have a porn addiction?
Oh, he absolutely does. A huge one, and we are going to talk about that. Lloyd left the house and got into a taxi cab. He went to the Morwell railway station and bought himself a ticket back home to Wangaratta. En route, he used Kay's cell phone to call his bank. He also used her phone to call adult fantasy chat lines.
No way.
Seriously, he was still turned on. But he just killed this woman and her daughter and is now using her cell phone for phone sex.
Because he's all hot and horny.
Yes.
From the kill.
Yes.
Okay.
It's so scary, too, thinking there's a man on the train. All these people have no idea what he's just done and what he's doing.
Yeah, that's disturbing. The guy sitting next to you on the train could be that person.
Right. It's an eerie thought. When Lloyd got to Wangaratta, he called his father and asked if he could stay with him for a bit. His father told him to come on over.
He didn't ask why he wasn't staying with Melissa anymore?
I don't know. I think he was just like, hey, Dad, can I come? Yeah, come on over. I don't believe that any of them had a stable life. So...
Oh, so it wasn't that big of a deal then?
No, it would not be shocking. I don't think so anyways. You didn't even have your kid in a stable childhood home growing up.
True.
As he traveled to his father's house, Lloyd threw Kay's cell phone into the nearby creek. The next day, he returned to the same creek and discarded the knife that he used to kill Melissa and her mother, along with its scabbard. The day after the horrific double murder, a male relative discovered the bodies of 19-year-old Melissa and 54-year-old Kay Moz. The women were murdered in the early morning hours, and later that evening they were supposed to attend a family event. When they didn't show up and no one could reach them, Kay's son-in-law, who was married to one of her other daughters, decided that he would go and check on his in-laws. He arrived at their home at 10 o'clock in the morning and found the house ransacked and his loved ones victimized in the most brutal of ways.
That would have been a grisly scene.
Oh, terrible. Police shut down the street and immediately began to investigate. They discovered that Kay was separated from her husband, Doug, who still lived in the area. I am sure he was questioned, but I don't believe he was ever a suspect. It's actually not always the husband. The Moz women were well known in the community, so police started to canvass the neighborhood. They were trying to piece together if the women knew their attacker or if someone had actually broken into their home and killed them. Some of the neighbors admitted that they heard a disturbance, but it didn't sound like anyone reported anything to the police at the time. Neighbors were shocked and terrified when they heard what had happened to Kay and her daughter Melissa. People who knew the two women spoke of how wonderful and lovely they were. Thankfully, it didn't take long for police to start piecing things together.
No kidding, you got a guy that lives with them who's missing.
Yes. Where was the 19-year-old boyfriend who was living with them at the time of the double homicide? And that I think they learned when talking to the neighbors. Early in the morning, 2 days after the murders, on Monday, August 20th, 2001, homicide detectives showed up to Lloyd's father's home. Thank goodness he didn't have the smarts to actually hide. Lloyd was apprehended and taken to Wangaratta Police Station for questioning. I'm not sure exactly how long it took, but Lloyd did end up confessing to everything, which is why we now have this very detailed report of what happened. Subsequently, the murder weapon and Kay's cell phone were both recovered from the creek where Lloyd told police he had thrown them. During this interview, when police asked him why he did what he did, Lloyd said about his girlfriend Melissa, quote, "I don't know. I don't. I just did, and I've been thinking about it ever since effing Saturday morning. Wouldn't have a clue. It's got me thinking all this time about what normal reason. She's the only girl that's ever loved me. Why the F would I want to hurt her?
That's what we want to know too.
A good question, Lloyd.
It doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't. Why would you want to hurt her? He just took the opportunity. And honestly, not that it would be any better, but he could have stabbed some random person on the street that he had no emotional connection to.
There was no lead up.
No.
There was no reason whatsoever.
No, he's even saying there was no reason. I wasn't mad at her. She was good to me. I don't even know why.
Randomness I find more scary.
Oh, totally. Because it means none of us are safe that way.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first states of business was ordering a psych evaluation on Lloyd. As I mentioned, Professor Paul Mullen conducted one of these evaluations. The court had to determine if he was sane enough to be able to plead guilty to 2 counts of murder. As part of Lloyd's pre-sentencing report, Professor Mullen spoke of Lloyd being a sexual sadist. He said about Lloyd, quote, Crosbie states that his relationship with Melissa Moss was the closest and most personally rewarding relationship of his life. Similarly, he describes his prior relationship with the mother, Mrs. K. Moss, as one of affection and closeness. The dreadful killings appear to have emerged not out of anger, resentment, or jealousy, but in the context of a fear of increasing closeness and a fear that he would inevitably lose these relationships which he valued. The killings themselves would appear to have elements not just of extreme brutality, but of active sadism involving sexual excitement linked to the murderous acts.
So the psychologist is saying that it's the sexual sadism that created that urge?
He's saying it definitely added to it, and also that Lloyd likely killed them because he was afraid to lose them.
Oh, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I've never had a love last in my life, and so it was almost a threat for him. If I'm in control of how and when I lose them, then it's not going to hurt as bad.
Right.
As twisted as that is, that could have been how he was feeling.
Did Lloyd say that, or that's what the psychologist extrapolated from his assessment?
That I'm not sure. He had examined him extensively, and this is what he concluded.
Okay.
So I'm sure that Lloyd would have
hinted at it.
Yes, at the very least. I am sure, being true crime fans, you have all heard about a sexual sadist before. But I decided to look a little more into it. I Googled it so you don't have to.
That's an interesting deep dig on your computer, Christy.
It was. I had to be very careful what exactly I opened. And since I took that risk, I thought I would share a little bit of what I discovered. Because as it turns out, almost no topic is off the table for us to learn about and discuss here on Buried Motives.
Okay, tell me what you learned.
I think we've covered it all at this point. I found an informative article put out by Psychology Today on this subject. It was last updated in November of 2021. They define sexual sadism as a disorder that takes sexual pleasure from humiliation, fear, emotional distress, or another form of harm to a person. You have to hurt someone in some way to get sexual pleasure.
Was BDSM part of Melissa and his bedroom activities?
That I'm not sure. But as I will explain, BDSM is not necessarily linked to sexual sadism. To keep it PG-13, I won't list all of the things that this can include, but to name a few, it can involve imprisonment, beating or inflicting pain, whipping, and restraining an unwilling partner. This article did point out that sexual sadism is not the same thing as BDSM. Relationships that involve bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, and sadism and masochism can be healthy between partners that are both consenting to the acts and respect each other's boundaries, consenting being the key word. Sexual sadism becomes a disorder when a person practices sadistic sexual acts without consent from their partner, or when sadistic fantasies or behaviors begin to cause issues in social, professional, or other functional areas of life. When this is taken to the extreme, it becomes criminal and will usually lead to serious harm or death of another person. It is considered a disorder only when the sadistic urges are acted upon.
Okay. And it's one that's not very treatable, right?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Once you become a sexual sadist, there's a hard road to get back from that. When sexual sadism is combined with traits associated with antisocial personality disorder, poor impulse control, lack of empathy and remorse, as well as dishonesty, sexual sadism can become especially dangerous and difficult to treat, as you just mentioned, which is what I think we see in Lloyd. He checks off pretty much all of those boxes, which makes him that much more dangerous. So how common is it to cross paths with a sexual sadist?
More common than we think. It's that guy on the train.
Right?
Or the girl, I guess.
Could be. But usually it is a guy, actually. According to this article, it can range between as low as 2% and up to 30% of a population.
30% is high.
3 out of 10.
That is way higher than I thought.
Just think if you're sitting in a restaurant, 3 out of every 10 people in that restaurant could be a sexual sadist.
That's a lot.
Yeah. I think it depends on the area.
Some countries have more sexual sadism than others.
Right. And that's why it goes as low as 2% up to 30%. What I found interesting when we put this into a crime context, less than 10% of civilly committed sexual offenders in the United States are considered to be sexual sadists. So if someone's a rapist, that doesn't mean that they're a sexual sadist. But when you look at individuals who have committed sexually motivated homicides, that number jumps to a range of 37 and 75%, which was wild to me.
That is a lot.
Mm-hmm. So rape cases that turn into murder, up to 75% of them could be sexual sadists. Another fact that I found interesting that applied almost exactly to Lloyd, right down to the month, was that according to the DSM-5, the average age for onset of sadism is 19.4. At the time of the murders, Lloyd was 19.3 years of age.
Oh, wow.
So almost exactly.
It's freaky.
Isn't it?
An interesting correlation.
It is. Tells me that they're bang on with their research. From other articles, I learned that most or almost all people with sexual sadism disorder are men. It's very rare to be found in a woman. This Psychology Today article addressed the fact that psychopathy and sexual sadism are not the same thing, but they do share the common co-occurrence of antisocial personality disorder.
But he wasn't diagnosed with that.
He wasn't. Sexual sadists are not automatically deemed psychopaths. They can be, but it doesn't go hand in hand all the time. What I also discovered is that sexual sadism can be seen in the brain. I will quote what the article said about this. It reads, "Why do sexual sadists enjoy the pain of others? Recent research suggests that engaging in sadistic sexual behavior is driven by a desire for feelings of power and dominance, in addition to simply sexual pleasure. This is true for those in the general population with a sexually sadistic fetish and for those with a severe enough condition to be diagnosed with sexual sadism disorder." According to an fMRI brain scan of 15 violent sexual offenders, sadists showed greater amygdala, which is a part of the brain associated with sexual arousal, activation when viewing images depicting pain. Sadists also rated these images as showing higher levels of pain than did non-sadists in the group. Further, sadists showed more activity in anterior insula, a pain processing part of the brain, than did non-sadists. This article also looked at the correlation between sadism and consuming pornographic materials, which we know Lloyd did. He even had to pack magazines in his getaway bag. This is not a clear-cut science, but studies are taking place on the subject. One study of 512 men and women showed that when a man was frequently exposed to pornography, he was found to behave more sadistically towards women, which I feel like that is something that needs to be looked into further. That being said, generally, it is unclear if sadistic pornography use is a cause of sexual sadism disorder or if it's a symptom. So a chicken and an egg scenario.
Oh, very interesting.
It is. And I won't go into more detail, but I did find the articles that I read quite fascinating, and treatments for this disorder are not an exact science. Part of the problem is that most sexual sadists will not willingly seek help with the disorder. What we do know is that if left unchecked, it can become very dangerous and even deadly, which is what happened with Lloyd. He was examined by multiple forensic psychologists, and they were all in agreement he was a sexual sadist. One of the other doctors to examine Lloyd was a consultant psychiatrist with the Victorian Institute of Forensic Mental Health named Dr. Grant Lester. During an examination that took place on February 18, 2002, at the Melbourne Assessment Prison, Lloyd told Dr. Lester that he had always been fascinated with death, destruction, and sex. He also said that he had always been angry and depressed, and that the anger he felt left him feeling alienated from everyone around him.
I could see how that could happen.
Mm-hmm. And why that would have driven his urge to be with his brothers.
Because he felt some commonality with them?
I would think so. He said his anger left him feeling alienated and alone, and his brothers taught him to be that way.
Right.
And if he was hiding this from Melissa, then that would make him feel very much on the outs.
Yeah, hiding his true self.
Yes. Lloyd continued to explain that during his school years, he resorted to stealing from people, vandalizing properties, and killing and torturing animals. He claimed that he had heard voices since he was 4 years old, and had recently heard voices prior to the murders telling him that Melissa and her mother were plotting to trap him. However, he admitted that he didn't hear any voices on the night of the killing.
So those were just kind of background thoughts that he had.
I think so.
Or little kind of ways that he justified it to himself.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it was an actual disorder that he had. Dr. J. Barry Walsh, another forensic psychiatrist consultant, examined Lloyd in prison in May of 2002. On May 27th, he submitted a report that stated that Lloyd had a lifelong history of obtaining pleasure, including sexual pleasures out of acts of violence and cruelty. Dr. Barry Walsh also stated that Lloyd became more animated and excited when he would talk about violent acts that he had done or how he would masturbate or have intercourse to fantasies of violence. Ultimately, after thorough examinations, all doctors involved in the case were in agreement and deemed Lloyd fit to plead guilty. Although he did experience hallucinations at times, it is not believed that he has any type of psychotic illness. Dr. Barry Walsh described how this can be when he said, quote, "The offenses themselves seem to be consistent with excitement that he experiences and the pleasure that he gains from violence. I would note that he tells me that at various times, he has thought of harming or killing most people that he has come into contact with, including members of his family. It was also notable on interview that he genuinely appeared to become more excited and interested when he talked about violent acts. Even in discussions of the offenses themselves, he acknowledges feelings of happiness and excitement when he thinks about his actions, coupled together with feelings of sadness and remorse. In other words, this man appeared to have developed sexual sadism, and the offenses can be understood as being a product of the sadism. Although sexual sadism is profoundly disturbed psychological behavior, it does not represent, nor is it, the product of a psychiatric illness. I think it presents that way, but it's just not the same thing. This means that Lloyd Crosbie is not sick, just sickening. He loved and missed the women in his life that he had so brutally attacked, murdered, and defiled, but still derived pleasure from reminiscing on what he did to them. So kind of like, oh man, I'm sad they're gone, but wasn't that awesome? It honestly disturbs me so much to think of the continued sexual gratification that Lloyd would have gotten, and maybe still even gets, from his abhorrent actions. And how unnerving it must have been for the doctors to hear him retell what he did with happiness and excitement.
Yeah, that's a little gross.
It's extremely gross. I agree with the judge in this case who said that his inner conflict demonstrated that Lloyd had yet to achieve any understanding of the enormity of the nature of his criminal conduct. If you're excited about it, you're not feeling sorry about it. The judge also pointed out that Lloyd wasn't stupid. Although he had been treated by teachers in his youth as a child of low academic ability, it was determined by the examining doctors that he was articulate and of good intelligence. He actually read a plethora of books in his teenage years. This means, though, that he was smart enough to know right from wrong, despite the terrible role models in his life who contributed to him being a, quote, grossly disturbed and distressing young man. During his sentencing, the judge pointed out just how horrific the details of the case were. The post-mortem reports and photographs were unimaginable to look at and go through. The judge said that the photos and post-mortem reports, along with the depositions, demonstrated just how brutal and frenzied the nature of his attack on his victims were. About the victims in this case, the judge said to Lloyd, quote, "The terror suffered by them in the course of your brutal attack can only be imagined. Your victims knew you well, and clearly, Kay Moz trusted you to share her house with her and her daughter. Melissa Moz trusted you to share her room and bed with her. There was not a scintilla of evidence to suggest that either of your victims had given you any cause of provocation or reason for anger which could in any way explain your murderous behavior towards them. The depravity with which you treated the body of your victim, Melissa, after her death is not only an aggravating factor, but it demonstrates a total lack of remorse by you at that time. These murders were not committed by you in an anger or rage, or in the course of interpersonal friction, or whilst your faculties were in any way affected by drugs or alcohol. You have provided no explanation to police or to those who have examined you for the murders. The prosecution in these circumstances submits that you killed for the sheer pleasure of killing.
He was just a dirtbag.
Yes, which is terrifying. The maximum sentencing for committing murder in Australia is life imprisonment. The attorneys representing Lloyd actually urged the judge to give Lloyd the minimum term possible since he had cooperated with the police, had minor prior convictions, experienced a rough childhood, and gave a full confession.
But it's not treatable.
It's not. He's not even remorseful. And you want him to get the least amount of sentencing as he can?
That's not what they do, though, is it?
They don't, thank goodness. The judge did acknowledge these things and mentioned that Lloyd's guilty plea allowed the court to avoid a trial. And I'll add, spared the Maws family further trauma. However, speaking to Lloyd, the judge said, quote, "Whilst there can be no doubt that the Crown case against you is overwhelming, your plea of guilty has avoided the necessity for a trial and has avoided the necessity for victims of your crime to give evidence against you and to experience the traumatic nature of a contested trial. However, beyond that, I'm unable to say that your plea of guilt reflects any significant degree of remorse on your part. There is nothing in the material before me which leads me to a conclusion that you suffer remorse in any meaningful way for your actions." So the judge wasn't buying it. He continued by saying, quote, "Indeed, the cold manner in which you described the shocking events which occurred is most disturbing. The description by you of your defilement of the body of Melissa on the videotape of the record of interview in a matter-of-fact and cold tone is chilling indeed. And I feel like it might take a lot for a Supreme Court judge to refer to a case as chilling.
Yeah.
But the details of this one definitely are.
Because you'd think they would have had a lot of different experiences with gruesome and cruelty.
Yes, exactly. Knowing that he was going to be sentenced for his crimes, Lloyd had the audacity to ask the judge for special care. He stated that it was a simple fact of prison life, that no one is safe. He wanted to continue to be in a protected program because he knew he would not fare well against the other prisoners. He said, quote, "I would be killed if I was in mainstream."
Please tell me they put him in mainstream.
This was just, I feel like, another slap in the face. Like, oh, I'm not really sorry, but can you protect me? No one was there to protect those women from you, Lloyd. Lloyd wanted the details of his crimes hidden, specifically the fact that he had raped a corpse. But the judge said that there was a necessity for open courts and open justice. He followed this by saying that judges and prison authorities have a duty of care to protect prisoners, but it was, quote, "not necessary to prohibit some details to afford such protection." Personally, I think good for the judge. If you are willing to do such horrific things to two human beings who loved and cared for you, why should this get to be your dirty little secret? I also wonder if this is why such a detailed document of this case was made public when there were such limited resources available.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. I have a feeling that the judge wanted to make sure that anybody who wanted to read or learn about his crimes could have access to it. Because like I said, it was rare for me to come upon a document like this.
It's interesting when judges can be cheeky like that.
Oh, I love it. And I don't know if that's what it is, but I'm kind of thinking probably so. Ultimately, after pleading guilty to 2 counts of murder and after 2 hearings, Lloyd was sentenced on March 11, 2003. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 30 years. He was given this sentence at the age of 20, just like his brothers. So he had reached his dirtbag goal. About handing down Lloyd's sentence, the judge said, quote, "The sanctity of human life must be protected by this court, and in my view, the dreadful and depraved nature of your crimes calls for severe punishment." The judge continued to explain that Lloyd remained a serious danger to the community, and that neither of the medical reports produced to the court made the judge believe that Lloyd was capable of being treated in the future.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it at all.
I honestly love this judge because after he said this, he did follow it up with a statement made by Professor Mullen during the pre-sentence report that basically said that despite how horrific Lloyd's actions were, he felt like Lloyd could develop personally and intellectually into someone who might eventually return to the community as a safe and reasonable citizen. But I tend to side with the judge on this one. But he did say that Lloyd was young, and it would be the duty of the parole board to determine if he would ever be reintegrated into society. I guess time will tell. Listeners, tell us what you think, if you think he could be reintegrated into society. In prison, there were many threats on his life, just as he predicted. As far as I could tell, he still does reside in protective custody, but everyone knows the vile things he did. And that was the part that he didn't want known.
That's probably why he needs protection.
Yes. The judge granted Lloyd time served of 568 days leading up to court proceedings to be taken from his sentence. Lloyd Crosbie will be eligible to apply for parole on August 20th, 2031, in 7 short years, when he will be 49 years old.
That doesn't seem that long from now.
It's not, which is a scary thought.
But he has spent a considerable amount of time in jail.
He has, but I hope that they do not grant him parole.
Oh, I can't imagine that they would.
No. If he were to get out in 7 years when he's only 49, he still has a good part of his life ahead of him and could wreak a lot of havoc in that time. When Justice Murray Kellum spoke about the sexual excitement that Lloyd got from killing Melissa and Kay, it was said that Lloyd smiled and nodded in the courtroom. He just sat and smiled when he was given his sentence as well. Showing his true colors, when he was being led away, Lloyd repeatedly started to yell horrific things to the Moz family who were seated in the courtroom. What a pig. He was angry that they wanted him to get the maximum sentence and was clearly unremorseful for what he did. And how cruel to add literal insult to the injury he had already caused this poor family.
That is wild.
It is. Like, how dare you? Like I said, there really weren't any huge alarm bells going off leading up to the double homicide. Doug Moz, Melissa's father and Kay's estranged husband, said that he had no inkling that Lloyd would do such a thing. He said, quote, "You never expect this." Doug also expressed that he believed that Lloyd should be shot, not sent to jail.
There's a lot of people that would share that same sentiment.
And considering this was his wife and his daughter, you can't blame him for feeling that way. During the court proceedings, Doug was able to give a heartfelt victim impact statement. Although Doug and Kay were estranged, they had maintained a good relationship with one another, and he was very close to his daughter Melissa. His loss was exponentially awful. The judge noted that because of the, quote, immense brutality and callousness of the murders, the loss of the 2 women were tragic. The judge mentioned that the man who discovered the bodies, Kay's son-in-law and Melissa's brother-in-law, quote, has and no doubt will continue to suffer immensely from the trauma, as will each of her surviving daughters, meaning Kay's other daughters and Melissa's sisters. The judge continued, quote, the loss of their mother and their sister in such horrendous circumstances is almost unbearable for them and will no doubt significantly and deleteriously affect their future lives. It was hard to find any information on the family. I couldn't even find photographs of Melissa or Kay. I could find photos of their gravestones. Melissa actually has 2 gravestones, one in Queensland, Australia that reads, quote, Melissa Joy Moz, beloved daughter, sister, and auntie, 1983 to 2001. Time was short but precious. Attached to this headstone are 2 sculptures, a blue dolphin and a black and white shark. My guess is that she must have loved these 2 animals. The other headstone photo was a shared one for Melissa and her mom, Kay Lucy Moz. This one is located in Victoria, Australia, and reads, quote, Moz, Kay and Melissa, 18/2/2001. Forever together, loved by all, never forgotten. I am unsure why their story hasn't been widely told, but I hope that they will never be forgotten and that their family will be taken care of and grow together in their healing journey. And that is the story of a young sexual sadist who killed the only girl who ever loved him and her caring mother, the dirtbag who was excited to kill to follow in his brother's footsteps, Lloyd Morris Crosbie. May you never be released.
Christy, that was a wild case, and I am just so disturbed that he does get off still on what he did.
I know. And sadly, no one can take that away from him. Those are his memories that he can access anytime he wants.
It's It's just so gross. And I'm shocked that that case has not been told more.
Yeah, unless I'm totally missing a bunch of reports on it, I could not find something. But maybe our listeners have. If you're from Australia, or even just if you've heard this case, please let us know. We're genuinely curious.
And if you're reaching out to us about that case, make sure you include how we're doing. Rate and review us. We would really appreciate it.
It helps us a lot. And because we appreciate you, we will be back again next week with another case.
Until then,
see ya.
Bye.
Testing, testing.
Yay. We have figured out our sound. We know what we're doing now.
It's only taken a long time. No, we're still learning.
Yeah. We don't know what we're doing.
No, not at all. Or even another podcast. Or even another... Why is my voice?
It's like a teenage boy. Or even another podcast.
I know. Come on, Gummy Bear.
Sure. We're not even 2 minutes into the case, listeners, and we're cracking out the snacks.
Okay, let's try this again. I could not find one YouTube. Oh. I don't know why my voice is being weird. Although the police knew he had the potential to become dangerous. Sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on with my voice today.
Drink from the strawberry this time.
Okay.
There's Happy Pills, Christy?
Isn't there?
I don't know.
Can we get our hands on them? On Monash University. A professor of forensic psychiatry at Monash, Monash, Monash. He went to the Morwell Railway. He went to the Morwell Railway.
Only 98% of the time. Actually, I don't know that stat.
No, I don't either.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.